Good evening, you're watching the news from the Sultan of Oman television. First, the headlines. The ceasefire agreement between Israel and the Palestinian fractions holds for the second day as Washington and the United Nations work on bringing humanitarian aid to Gaza. And the UN Special Envoy for Libya warns the Security Council on failure to get rid of Libya mercenaries. Those are the headlines, and now for the news in detail. U.S. President Joe Biden says that Washington would work with the United Nations on bringing humanitarian and reconstruction assistance to Gaza, with safeguards against funds being used to arm Hamas. The State Department announced Blinken's visit on Thursday without announcing dates and said he would discuss recovery efforts and working together to build better futures for Israeli and Palestinians. The top U.S. diplomat would visit Egypt and Jordan, as well as the Palestinian Authority, which is run by Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. Biden pledged to help organize efforts to rebuild Gaza and said creating a Palestinian state alongside Israel is the only answer to the conflict. He said they still need a two-state solution. Peace talks have since stalled since 2014, including over the key issues of the status of occupied East Jerusalem and Israeli settlements in the West Bank. Egyptian mediators held talks today to firm up an Israeli-Hamas ceasefire as Palestinians in the Hamas-ruled Gaza Strip began to assess the damage from 11 days of intense Israeli bombardment. A 130-truck convoy carrying urgently needed aid was headed to Gaza. Today marked the first full day of a truce that ended the fourth Israeli-Hamas war in just over a decade in the fighting. Israel unleashed hundreds of airstrikes against targets in Gaza, while Hamas and other groups fired more than 4,000 rockets towards Israel. More than 250 people were killed, the vast majority of them Palestinians. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is to meet with Mahmoud Abbas and Israeli leaders when he visits in the coming weeks. Abbas is expected to raise demands that any Gaza reconstruction plans go through the Palestinian Authority to avoid strengthening Hamas. The UN Special Envoy for Libya warned the Security Council yesterday that progress on the issue of withdrawing mercenaries and foreign fighters from Libya has stalled, and their continued presence is a threat not only to Libya, but to the entire African region. Jean Kubis said recent disturbing events in neighboring Chad, where rebels were blamed for last month's killing of longtime President Idriss Déby Itno, are a reminder of the link between the security situation in Libya and the security and stability in the region. Kubis said the UN mission in Libya, known as UNSMIL, reported the continuing presence of foreign elements, mercenaries and assets, thus entrenching the division of Libya. Kubis said the UNSMIL also reported that progress in opening this road from the strategic city of Sirte, the gateway of the country's major oil fields and export terminals, is stalled. U.S. President Joe Biden and South Korean President Moon Jae-in yesterday expressed a desire to engage North Korea in diplomacy in trying to reduce tensions over Pyongyang's nuclear weapons and ballistic missile programs. At a joint news conference with Moon, Biden said he was willing to meet North Korean leader Kim Jong-un if Kim agreed to talk about Pyongyang's nuclear weapons program. North Korea thus far has rebuffed U.S. entreaties for diplomacy since Biden took over from Trump, who had 3 summits with Kim and famously exchanged beautiful letters. Kim nonetheless refused to give up his nuclear weapons, but did impose a freeze on testing them. The IMF yesterday proposed a $50 billion plan to end the COVID-19 pandemic, with a target of vaccinating at least 40% of the world's population by the end of 2021. The modest financial commitment pales in comparison to the massive stimulus rolled out by rich nations, including the latest $1.9 trillion package approved in March. The plan is dwarfed by the economic benefits the International Monetary Fund calculates would be gained by an early end to the pandemic, amounting to $9 trillion from the faster economic recovery. IMF chief Kristalina Georgieva presented the plan to the world leaders at the G20 Global Health Summit in Rome that aims to have at least 60% of the world's population vaccinated by the end of 2022. As India faces a COVID emergency with more than 4,000 deaths daily, Georgieva warned that there will be no lasting end to the economic crisis without an end to the health crisis. The IMF called for more action by the G20 nations, including grants, concessional lending, and donations of COVID-19 vaccines and treatments. A 6.4 magnitude earthquake struck Yunnan province in southwestern China, killing 3 people and injuring 28. The quake hit at a depth of 8 kilometers late yesterday and was followed by aftershocks. Another tremor measuring 7.4 magnitude struck Qinghai province in western China today. The collapse of some roads along with landslides in Yunnan province had cut some transportation lines, but electricity, telephones and internet were working. The quake was felt in all 12 countries and cities of the prefecture, with Yangbi being the worst hit. Residents in Yangbi have been evacuated to temporary shelters. An emergency has been declared and rescue operations were launched in Dali, a city of 134,000 people, about 24 kilometers from the epicenter. China's first Mars rover has driven down from its landing platform and is now roaming the surface of the red planet. The solar-powered rover touched Martian soil at 10:40 a.m. today, Beijing time. China landed the spacecraft carrying the rover on Mars last Saturday, a technically challenging feat more difficult than a moon landing and a first for the country. It is the second country to do so after the United States. Named after the Chinese god of fire, Zhu Rong, the rover has been running diagnostic testing for several days before it began its exploration today. It is expected to be deployed for 90 days to search for evidence of life. The U.S. also has an ongoing Mars mission with the Perseverance rover and a tiny helicopter exploring the planet. NASA expects the rover to collect its first sample in July for return to Earth as early as 2031. Still to come in our news bulletin. The Sultanate joins the world in celebrating the International Day for Biological Diversity. Welcome back to the news from the Sultanate of Oman television. The public authority students in primary and secondary education across the Sultanate have once again connected to their virtual learning while others are preparing for their final examinations immediately after spending the Eid holidays. More details in the following report.
General school students of primary and secondary education across the Sultanate have once again connected to their virtual learning, while others are preparing for their final examination immediately after spending their Eid holiday with families in their own homes, part of the precautionary measures against the novel coronavirus COVID-19. Students were happy to be with their immediate family, but they have very much missed the fun of spending time with their extended families and friends.
I miss the test of Eid. I miss Al-Khadra airport shed and I miss my grandma.
This time I spent Eid with my family at home. I didn't go anywhere.
While others were happy to be united with their relatives who were out of Oman, of course, after completing quarantine duration.
We celebrated Eid very well this time, with the presence of our father, who was away to work outside Oman. And now, we're back online for our studies. And guess what? We've already started our exams.
Online studies has its own challenges that were expressed with the students thanks to the continuous follow-up from the education body who have worked and continues to do so in facilitating all necessary guidelines.
We are continuing with our online studies for our final year of grade 12 standard. There were some challenges that we have faced, but we managed to deal with those challenges due to good guidance from our teachers, and we are aiming for good results, inshallah.
Closures of schools and other learning spaces have impacted 94% of the world's students' population, up to 99% in lower and lower middle income countries. Despite difficulties faced by students, education continued. The educational experience provided Oman with rare opportunities. It forced most traditional academics into adopting new methods of teaching and learning. Students had to be creative too and learn new skills of conducting research and learning. Abdullah bin Ahmed al-Rubi'i, Sultanate of Oman Television, Muscat.
The Sultanate of Oman joins the world in celebrating International Day for Biological Diversity under the slogan, "We are part of the solution," aimed various achievements in the field of persevering nature and maintaining the biological balance. This year's solution comes as a continuation of last year. Momentum, or solutions are in nature, acting as a reminder that biodiversity is the key to various topics concerning climate change and sustainable development challenges, as well as food, water, and resource security. The International Day for Biological Diversity is within the scope UN post-2015 Development Agenda for Sustainable Development Goals that focus on international cooperation framework in the topic. The Omani government, represented by the Environment Authority, has launched multiple environment projects and awareness campaigns with the aim to contribute to protect wildlife and nature habitats for endangered species in the country. In 1992, Oman joined the Biodiversity Agreement, which was ratified in 1994 by the Royal Decree No. 119/94 to cement its commitments and stands with the international community to protect biodiversity and allow Earth to be accommodating to various species around the world. Tradings in Muscat Stock Exchange recorded 16.7 million Omani Rials as it increased by 32 points to reach 3,868 points. Reports released from Muscat Stock Exchange showed the financial sector was at its best since September 2020 by exceeding the 6,000 threshold. The services and Sharia-compliant sectors gained 4 and 6 points respectively, while only the industrial sector receded by 16 points. The total investments of conventional commercial banks and securities amounted to 4.6 billion Omani Rials by end of March 2021, with an increase by 24.9%. The report issued by Central Bank of Oman showed that the total credit granted by commercial banks rose by 1.5%. Meanwhile, the credit granted to private sector declined to reach 19.1 billion Rials by the end of March 2021. The deposits of public sector institutions witnessed a decline by 19.7% to reach 1.2 billion in the same period. This is the Sultanate of Oman Television. Before we end tonight's bulletin, here are the main points once again. The ceasefire agreement between Israel and the Palestinian factions holds for the second day as Washington and the United Nations work on bringing humanitarian aid to Gaza. And the UN Special Envoy for Libya warns the Security Council on failure to get rid of Libya mercenaries. And from all of us here at the newsroom and the studio, it's good night and stay safe.